Welcome to Cursed TV, where shadows whisper and the night comes alive. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and let us know where you're watching from. Turn off the lights, relax, and let the stories begin. Story 1. It was a night like any other, on the desolate highways that crisscrossed through the heart of nowhere. My name's Jake, and I'm a truck driver. Been hauling cargo through the lonesome roads for a decade. The kind of life that keeps you company with the hum of the engine and the endless stretch of asphalt. That night I found myself on a particularly eerie stretch of road, swallowed by an impenetrable fog, the kind that wraps around you like a suffocating shroud, concealing the world beyond. The only companions were the dim glow of my headlights cutting through the mist and the rhythmic beat of raindrops on the roof of my rig. I'd heard rumors on the CB radio about this stretch, a place where truckers whispered of abandoned cars, tales of drivers gone missing without a trace. It was enough to send shivers down the spine of even the most seasoned drivers. But I'd always scoffed at such stories. That is, until that night, as I maneuvered through the winding road, the fog became denser, almost palpable. Visibility dropped to a few feet ahead, and the low hum of the engine seemed swallowed by an oppressive silence. The glow of my headlights refracted off the mist, casting eerie shadows that danced like wraiths in the night. It was then that I saw him, a silhouette on the side of the road, a man, or so it seemed, standing motionless in the fog. My instincts told me to keep going, but the human in me wanted to lend a helping hand. I eased off the gas, and the truck rolled to a stop beside him. He was oddly pale, and the fog clung to his form like a ghostly cloak. But what sent a shiver down my spine were his eyes, big, round, and as black as the void itself. His mouth, a gaping maw, stretched wide in a manner that defied the laws of anatomy. I hesitated, a chill crawling up my spine. Something was terribly wrong. The man creature didn't move, didn't acknowledge my presence. He just stood there, staring into the fog. With a lump in my throat, I decided to get going. But as I revved up the engine, I head back at him. That's when I saw it, the twisted, grotesque smile that curled on his featureless face. Panic surged through me, and I slammed my foot on the gas pedal, leaving the fog-draped figure behind. As I drove away, I grabbed the radio IC to share my unsettling encounter with fellow truckers. But to my dismay, the once buzzing airwaves were silent. No static, no voices, just an unsettling void that mirrored the fog outside. The road seemed endless, and I pushed the accelerator harder, the engine roaring in protest. I needed distance from that creature, needed the safety of the city lights. But as the miles blurred together, the fog persisted, unyielding. I drove way over 100 miles, and was sure that creature was far away, and I would never meet it again. In the distance, a lonely parking lot emerged, and I decided it was time to pull over. The weariness and fear clawed at me, and I desperately needed a moment to collect myself. I shut off the engine, closed the curtains, and tried to shake off the encounter as mere imagination. Little did I know that the night had only just begun, and the horrors lurking in the fog were far from done with me. I tried to convince myself that it was just fatigue playing tricks on my mind. I locked the doors, closed the curtains, and nestled into my bunk, hoping that the haunting image of that pale figure with the unnaturally large eyes and twisted smile would fade away with the night, but sleep remained elusive. After what felt like hours of tossing and turning, a sense of impending doom washed over me, jolting me awake. A shiv ran down my spine as I fumbled to open the curtains. The parking lot was bathed in an eerie glow from the flickering overhead lamps, casting long shadows that seemed to dance in the fog. When I saw them again, 3 of those nightmarish creatures, they stood like sentinels, their dark eyes fixed on the truck. Panic gripped me as I fumbled to turn on the cabin lights, revealing their ghastly features in all their horrifying glory. Their mouths, wide open, emitted guttural growl that reverberated through the metal walls of the truck. The air in the cabin grew thick with an otherworldly presence, a malevolence that seeped through every pore of my being. I reached for the ignition, praying that the truck would roar to life and carry me far away from this nightmare. But nothing happened. The engine remained silent, as if in protest against the encroaching terror. The creatures, sensing my vulnerability, began to advance. Their movements were unsettlingly smooth, almost as if they were gliding across the asphalt. The growls intensify, echoing through the desolate parking lot. I could feel the cold sweat trickling down my back as desperation set in. My hands trembled as I repeatedly turned the key, willing the engine to respond. The growls escalated into a cacophony, and the creatures closed in, their features contorted in a grotesque display of hunger. Just as the creatures were about to reach the truck, a surge of relief washed over me. As the engine roared to life, I slammed the gear into drive, the truck jolting forward, leaving the creatures behind in the rearview mirror. As the truck sped away, I couldn't shake the feeling that the creatures were not bound by the laws of the physical world. Their terrifying growls echoed in the distance. Even as the city lights finally emerged on the horizon, I dared a glance back, and to my horror, I saw the creatures running after the truck with unnatural speed, far beyond anything human. It was as if the shadows themselves were chasing me. As I drove into the welcoming glow of city lights, the creatures abruptly halted. Their twisted forms lingered at the edge of the urban sprawl, their growls fading into the night. Relief mingled with a lingering dread. As I realized they had a boundary, a limit to their reach, I parked the truck in a well-lit area, surrounded by the comforting hum of civilization. My hands trembled as I reached for the radio mic once more, hoping to connect with someone, anyone. But the static-filled airwaves remained stubbornly silent. The city lights seemed to push back the darkness, but I couldn't shake the feeling that those creatures were still out there, waiting in the shadows for their next opportunity to strike. The night was far from over, and the road ahead held more horrors than I could fathom. I spent the restless hours of the night parked in that well-lit haven, the city lights warding off the encroaching darkness. But no matter how brightly the urban landscape glowed, the images of those nightmarish creatures lingered in the recesses of my mind, their growls echoing like a sinister melody. As dawn began to break, I couldn't shake the feeling that the nightmare was far from over. I pulled back onto the road, my eyes scanning every shadow, every patch of fog. With a newfound paranoia, the city lights gradually faded in the rearview mirror as the road stretched into another desolate expanse. My radio crackled to life, the sudden sound making me jump. It was a voice, a fellow trucker. "Hey, you there, you okay?" The voice sounded concerned, and I eagerly responded, recounting the horrors of the night, the fog-shrouded figures, the broken radio, and the unrelenting pursuit. There was a pause on the other end, and then the voice spoke, heavy with a mix of fear and disbelief. "You're not alone. We've all heard those stories. The abandoned cars, the creatures in the fog. But we always they were just stories." The revelation sent a chill down my spine. I wasn't the only one who had faced those monstrous entities. The radio buzzed with hushed conversations among truckers, each sharing their own encounters with the supernatural on this stretch of road. The stories varied, but a common thread emerged. Those creatures, with their haunting eyes and twisted smiles, were a malevolent force that seemed drawn to the lonely roads in the dead of night. No one knew their origin or their purpose, but they left a trail of fear in their wake. As I continued my journey, the unease persisted. The road seemed to stretch endlessly, and the fog clung to the edges of the highway like a malevolent specter. I couldn't shake the feeling that those creatures were watching, waiting for the opportune moment to strike again. The radio chatter intensified, with truckers exchanging advice on how to avoid the creatures, sharing tales of those who had disappeared without a trace. The fear was palpable, a shared experience that bound us together in the face of the unknown. With each passing mile, the city lights became a distant memory. The road ahead was swallowed by an impenetrable fog, and the radio once again fell silent. The hairs on the back of my neck stood on end, and a cold sweat broke out across my forehead as I approached the familiar stretch where I first encountered the creatures. A sense of dread settled over me. The fog thickened, and the atmosphere grew heavy with the weight of unseen eyes. Then, a haunting realization struck me. This road was a loop, an unending circuit that brought travelers back to the heart of the supernatural. The city lights, the camaraderie on the radio, all illusions meant to deceive. The creatures weren't bound by distance. They were bound by time, forever haunting those who dared traverse this cursed stretch. A guttural growl echoed through the fog, and the twisted figures emerged once again. Their black bore into my soul, their gaping mouths emitting an otherworldly wail. I slammed my foot on the gas pedal, the engine roaring in protest, but the truck seemed tethered to the nightmarish loop. As the creatures closed in, the fog swallowed everything, and the road became an unending void. The last thing I saw were those eyes, an abyss that seemed to consume all light. The radio crack led to life one final time, a chorus of terrified voices screaming a warning. But it was too late. The creatures closed in, and the world descended into darkness. And so, the haunted highway aimed another victim, lost to the eternal night and the malevolent creatures that lurked within the fog. The loop continued, a never-ending cycle of horror, trapping the unwary in an unending nightmare. The road stretched on, shrouded in fog, a haunted path that few dared to traverse, and even fewer escaped. Story 2. I've been driving for the last 9 years, and I've loved it since the moment I started my first job. I work independently, meaning that I bid for delivery contracts against other driving services, be they independent or companies. I'm not married, and I have no kids, so driving around the country is ideal for me. Doing so independently allows me to pick and choose where I go, and when driving alone at night on an empty road can get a bit unsettling. Despite listening to movies, TV shows, and music all the while, it's the solidarity of driving for hours without seeing another living soul. That fact that if something were to happen, no one would be around to hear you scream. That make the prospect a bit off-putting. The rules of no sleep state that only one story is allowed per post. So I will do my best to provide as much detail in each of my tales to make it worth your while. Back in 2011, I was tasked with hauling a load from the distributor in Detroit, to Seattle, Washington, and due to overnight construction on the interstate, I needed to take a road called Montana Highway 200. That road is the epitome of what I described earlier, hours of driving without seeing another living soul. Due to my schedule, I found myself traversing this stretch of road around 11 p.m. I was wide awake, though, so I decided to push on. I was about 130 miles east of the city of Great Falls, Mount, and I was watching one show or another, just kinda spacing out as I drove through the dark. All the electronics of the rig suddenly flickered. The laptop screen went black for a few quick moments, as did the headlights, and the lights on the sides of the truck. After a few seconds, toll was fine, though I was a bit perturbed because the lights on the truck were the only lights around me. Without them, I couldn't see more than 20 feet in any direction. I continued driving for another few miles, and everything flickered a few more times. I came up over a hill, and the headlights dimmed severely, to the point I could only see a few feet past the front of the truck. As I reached the bottom of the hill, the lights suddenly surged. The brights were brighter than they'd ever been. The interior lights of the truck were on at 110% power. The orange lights on the side of the truck glowed brightly into the darkness that surrounded me. And with that, the truck shut off. I came rolling to a stop at the bottom of the hill and spent some time trying to fix the issue, ultimately finding myself unable to get the truck started back up. I pulled my phone out of my pocket, and of course, I had no signal, with nothing in front of or behind me for 50 miles. And the fact that I hadn't seen another vehicle on this road since I got on it, I decided the only thing I could really do was try to get a signal on my phone to call I grabbed a flashlight, got out of the truck, and began doing the ever-popular hold your phone up in the air move while I walked aimlessly in the dark. I think it was because I was so focused on the truck and my phone that I didn't realize how terrifying it was out there. The stars weren't very bright, and the moon was resting comfortably behind trees in the distance. Being at the bottom of a hill didn't help. I stayed close to the truck, but wandered around a bit, looking for any semblance of a signal. When I still couldn't get any, I shined my flashlight around a bit, and saw a hill on the opposite side of the road. Just as I was going to go to the hill, I saw a light in the distance. the unmistakable glow of headlights. I breathed a sigh of relief, then looked down at my phone, then back up, and the lights were substantially closer than they just had been. Much too close for a car to be driving. Then I blinked, and once again they were gone. But at that same moment, it was like the sounds of the world stopped. Cicadas in the distance, CEA said. Crickets went silent, and the sound of blowing wind evaporated. And with that, it was completely, deafeningly, ear-shatteringly silent. It was so quiet that it was disorienting. I leaned against the truck while I got my bearings, and then once again tried to find the lights that had been driving toward me. But I couldn't see them. I shined my flashlight around me, out into the distance, trying to find the hill I had wanted to climb to try to get signal on my phone. But I was taken aback when something else caught my eye, a door, off the side of the road, maybe 10 to 15 yards out. There was a door. It was a door like any one you'd find in a house. Intrigued, I walked over to it. With a cautious reserve, it was in a frame, and had a doorknob and everything. As I got closer, I felt an overwhelming wave of anxiety come over me. I wasn't scared, necessarily, but rather nervous. I didn't know what was going on. I couldn't hear anything. A car may not have been heading in my direction, and there was a door standing in what was quite literally the middle of nowhere. It was just an overload of things I didn't understand. I reached the door and walked around it, and it was just that, a door, standing free in the middle of a huge open field. Now that I was closer, I could see that there was a design in the door, flowers to be precise, painted in very light pastel colors. So light that even if it was the middle of the day, I wouldn't have been able to see them from where I'd first noticed the door. As I was inspecting it, my sense of hearing returned, and I was hit with a flood of noise, like the lights that amplified a short time prior. The sounds blared like my head was inside a speaker. The sounds of crickets and cicadas nearly brought me to my knees before they returned to normal levels. I had barely had a chance to collect myself when I saw movement near the front of the truck. I shined my light towards it, and for a split second, I saw a glimpse of what looked like a person moving from my line of vision to behind the truck. I yelled out to whoever it was, with a generic "hey," and abandoned my interest in the door. I lightly jogged over to the truck, and with the same cautious reserve, I turned the corner to see who was by the truck. The same thing happened, though, and as I turned the corner, so did whoever it was that was there, only at the other end of the truck, and I saw the same glimpse of a possible person now moving behind the trailer. Instead of hazing them the way they were going, I moved in the opposite direction and tried to meet them around the other side of the truck. But when I did, I saw no one. I couldn't hear any footsteps or anything. It was like I'd imagined someone there, only I knew I hadn't. I decided to look under the truck to see if I could see the feet of whoever it was. I crouched down, got as low as I needed to see underneath the trailer, and shined my flashlight, of course. I saw no one, but at that moment, I felt eyes on me. The feeling was unmistakable. I'm sure you know the one I'm talking about. I slowly stood back up and shuddered when I was finally upright. I then felt a warm breath on my neck and quickly spun around, only to find myself face to face with someone. I still don't know what I was looking at. Their face was a blur, like it was vibrating almost. But not, I know that's a terrible description, but it's the only way I can think of to put it. If you've ever seen he show the Flash, think of Reverse Flash, but only their face. The only feature I could make out was actually a lack of a feature where eyes would have been, though I wouldn't have been able to really see them properly. There was just solid black, like the sockets were hollow. They were wearing a suit, but it was like an amalgam of other suits, a patchwork array of different fabrics and monochromatic colors all sewn together. Though it was all done very precisely, like you could actually go into a store and buy it. It wasn't sloppy in the least. Finally, on their head was a top hat, though a subtle one. It was a dark gray, almost gunmetal, and somehow it, as well as the rest of their body, was still. Only their face seemed to be out of focus. I was frozen in fear, once again consumed by the anxiety caused by the unknown and unfamiliar. I simply stood there, face to face with this person, for what seemed like an eternity, though in reality, it couldn't have been more than 2, maybe 3 seconds. I then felt another warm breath on the back of my neck, which made me instinctively shudder and spin around. Only there was no one behind me. Upon seeing this, I turned around once again to keep my eyes on whoever I had just been face to face with. Only they were gone. I was alone once again. The feeling of being watched was gone. I was standing next to the truck by myself. The normal sounds of the night surrounding me and the crippling feeling of anxiety had dissipated. The orange lights on the side of the truck then flickered back on, as did the headlights. I cautiously walked around to the driver's side of the truck and climbed in, finding that when I'd gotten out of the truck, I had left the keys in the ignition, turned to the point that the electrics in the vehicle would be on. I closed the door and attempted to start the truck, and was relieved when there was a rumbling, then the roar of the engine. I didn't think twice before putting it into gear and continuing down Montana Highway 200. There were so many aspects of that night that I didn't understand. I finished the job, and all the while I was trying to rationalize what had happened and why. It was all so confusing, but it would not be the last time I encountered the same aspects of what happened that night. The person with the vibrating face, the sound and light surges, and that door, that flowery, pastel, freestanding door. I would see them again about 8 months later. Story 3. I'm from Connecticut. I was in a long-distance relationship with a girl from Georgia, and would often make road trips down to visit her. I don't really mind. I love road trips. I've driven across the United States and back, all on my own. There's just something about traveling the highways of the U.S. by yourself that's just so freeing. To save money, I would sleep in my car. It's not so bad. It's basically camping in a metal tent. Makes you feel like you're really roughing it. I just recline the seat back, keep the key in the ignition just in case, and doze off. No, I don't put anything up to block the windows for privacy. Maybe I should have. The trip down south is a comfortable 2-day drive. My stop would usually be somewhere along the Virginia-North Carolina border. For my previous trip, That's exactly where I stopped that night. Rest stops were often less trafficked, and thus quieter, than truck stops. Normally I would have stopped at a Love's, but I was so tired that I settled for the first rest stop I saw. It was oddly vacant that night, with only a couple lone cars sitting forlorn under the amber street lamps. Most likely travelers with the same idea as myself. I pulled into a parking spot away from the others, under the shadow of a tree and far from the street lamps. I figured I would have more privacy there, as opposed to being bathed in light. So I did my usual thing, locked my doors, opened the window just a hair for ventilation, kept my key in, reclined the seat, and went to sleep. I was never interrupted on any of T.H.'s car camping nights, so I never suspected anything on this one. Then a sharp tap woke me up. At first, I thought I had heard it in my dream. I opened my eyes, a bit confused. Since I was leaned back, I was facing the ceiling and couldn't see anything. I hear another tap, like a tiny object hitting a hard surface. It came in an irregular rhythm. Was it raining? Was water dripping onto my windshield? I'm under a tree. Maybe something fell from the branches. Maybe a squirrel or a bird was dropping something. What if a squirrel was climbing around my car? Or what if it wasn't an animal? The thought occurred to me that it might very well be a person poking around outside. What did they want? Were the doors locked? Yes. The keys were in the ignition. I can leave in an instant. Still, I lay there, completely still, pretending to be asleep, pretending I hadn't heard anything, hoping whoever it was, I'll leave me alone. It was better to not find out. I was too afraid to find out. It was better to stay here in blissful ignorance. Still, the tapping continued. I had to do something. As no way I was just going to stay there. I had to look. My heart was pounding. In that moment, it was deafeningly loud. Whoever was out there could probably hear it. I decided I was going to look. I was going to raise my head up and see what was making the noise. So that's what I did. What met my eyes sent a jolt through my entire body. Every muscle fiber locked up in pure shock. What I saw. The faint glow of the street lamps cast just enough light for me to make out what I was looking at. There in the windshield, staring directly at me, was a face. Someone, I presumed to be a woman, was lying on my hood, her face pressed right up against my windshield. Her face was completely still, locked in a permanent grin. I froze in overwhelming terror. The eyes I stared into appeared to have rolled back, showing only the whites. The nose was turned up, pressed painfully into the glass. The lips stretched wide, revealing horrid rotten teeth. Even in the darkness, I could tell her skin was sickly pale, contrasting her long, filthy black hair. Whoever this was, she was clearly not in her right mind. I don't know how long I sat there, too afraid to move. Finally, I got a grip on myself and shot my hand to the ignition. It turned over, making, in that instant, the most beautiful sound I ever heard. For a split second, I was afraid I might be caught in a horror movie scenario, the one where the car won't crank as the killer approaches. I reversed as fast as I could, trying not to give this creeper time to try anything. In my pan, I remember activating the windshield wipers in a futile attempt to get her off. I thought, was I about to drive out of here with some wacko holding on to my hood? Thankfully, I didn't have to worry about that, because as soon as I stopped, the woman leapt off, landing on all fours. Seeing my opportunity, I shifted into drive and gunned it. Right as I saw her reaching for the driver's side door. With my foot on the gas, I sped out of the parking lot. Behind me, I heard her let out a piercing shriek like that of an animal. I looked in my rear-view mirror, and for a split second, I thought I saw her chasing me, running on all fours, her black hair swinging wildly around her. I couldn't get a good look as I rounded a curve in the road leading out of the rest stop and merged with the highway. There, I picked up speed and drove through the night. I did not dare stop again until I saw the morning light. Story 4. This one goes way back to the first year I started driving. I wasn't a total novice, but you could say I was still lacking a bit of experience. It was pretty late at night. I had the babysitter overnight, so I spent the midnight hours on the streets trolling for passengers. This small group of 3 people waved me down from the entrance of a bar, so I stopped to pick them up. The back of my car seats too, but I figured they wouldn't mind squeezing in. There were 2 guys and 1 girl. "Hey guys, hop in. Careful, watch your step," I said. "Haha, thanks. Come on, move it. It's cold," one of them said. They were all laughing and visibly drunk. The smell of alcohol filled my car pretty much immediately after they all piled in. "Take us to my house, please." "Thank you, haha," the girl said. Then she balled up a $20 and threw it at me. "Hey, don't throw anything at me. I'm driving, or I kick all of you out, all right." I said, "Finny, just take me home already." She said, "You have to tell me where you live first." I said. They all turned to each other and laughed. It took 3 more attempts of asking them where she lived before one of the guys finally told me. I wish I knew then what I knew now. Installing a closable window between the back and front seats really comes in handy when you're drunk passengers. It's the funniest thing in the world to throw things at you. This went on for about half their trip before something bounced off the back of my head and I'd had enough. I stopped the car on the side of the road. "Hey, that's enough. You throw on." I stopped mid-sentence. The girl was gone, just not there between the 2 boys. They didn't even look like they noticed. I hadn't stopped the whole trip until now, and the car door never opened. "Where's the girl?" I asked. "What girl?" "There's a girl," the boy on the left said, while making obnoxious sounds I'd rather not describe. "The girl that was with you. Where did she go?" I asked again. "Ha ha ha, brew. Our cabbie is drunk too. He's seeing things," the other one chimed in. I was stunned, not just by how this girl managed to just disappear from my cab mid-trip, but also how oblivious these 2 boneheads were being about it. "Just drive ma in. I promise I won't throw anything at you again, I swear," said one of them. At this point I was ignoring them. I drove all the way back along the same roads and looked for her, but didn't find a thing. There was no trace of her anywhere, and the 2 morons in the back seat were not helping. I drove them to the address they gave me, and they both got out. They wadded up more money and just tossed it at the car as they walked away, laughing into a completely empty lot between 2 houses. Her old house and anyone who lived there was gone too. Just a concrete square between two normal-looking houses in a subdivision. I drove off before a duo of drunken idiots could realize they were not where they wanted to be, and drove to the police station to see if they could help. I gave them her description and everything I knew that happened, but it was clear from the start that I wasn't going to be taken seriously. I guess I should have known that a drunk girl not coming home after one night of bar hopping wouldn't be high on their priority list. I actually started to think that I was the one who lost it, until I remembered I had interior camera footage. I played back the video, and I was glad to see I wasn't crazy, as he definitely was a young girl with the group at the start. I scrolled through the video a bit and watched in horror. She just disappears from my back seat. I even slowed down the video frame by frame. My camera takes video at 30 frames per second, and between 2 frames of video, she just blinks out of existence. In 1/30th of a second, she's just gone. The police had no interest in his footage. They chalked it up as a glitch in the video or some kind of prank. It was kinda terrifying how little they seemed to care. It made me wonder how many times something like this could have happened and no one even noticed. It was the second time walking back to my car from the police station when I noticed something sitting on the floor of my back seat. It was her driver's license. Her name was Taylor Evans, and now other than me, you guys reading this are the only ones who know that she ever existed. No one looked for her. No one missed her. No one even noticed. I still have her ID, sitting in a box with some other stuff left in the back of my cab that someone might eventually come looking for. I hope that somehow, against all odds, I'll have the chance to give it back to her one day. I've learned a lot from experiences like that. Over the years, the shit that happens to you starts to pile up, and before you know it, you've seen it all. But that doesn't mean it's any less terrifying. Just that you've got better odds of knowing what to do when that shit hits the fan. I have a motto I like to think I live by that applies to this next story pretty well. You prepared yesterday to live today to prepare for tomorrow. It was the summer season, and like most people with jobs, when it gets nice out, you get busy. Lots of people got in and out of my cab this day, to and from 100 different places. Quick is why when I found a suitcase stashed under my seat at the end of the day, I really didn't have much hope of finding who it belonged to, even after searching through the footage afterwards. I couldn't get a good look at anyone bringing a suitcase into my cab. Either way, I knew just what to do. It's probably not a surprise to hear that people leave things in my cab a lot. Usually it's a phone or a wallet, and people will realize real quick where they left it. If it's something valuable like that, I always take it to the local police station for them to hold on to. It works out for me because either I get to reunite people with their lost shit, or after a certain time period where no owner can be found, you get to keep the stuff you send in. This process also keeps me safe from any legal liability. Can't say I stole anything if I took it right to the police station. So that's exactly what I did with that suitcase. I took it into the police station the next morning without even trying to open it. In my experience, if I did open it, Then I could have been accused of stealing anything that might have gone missing from it, which I didn't want to have happen. I opted off and went right back to driving my cab. Didn't think much about it. About 2 hours after I dropped off the suitcase, a disheveled man frantically waved me down from the sidewalk. And as I hopped in, he started spit-firing questions at me faster than I could answer. "Hey, are you the cab driver from yesterday?" "Yes, I recognize you. You drove me yesterday to the university, remember?" "Okay, this is really important. Do you remember seeing a suitcase? Like this big, and it was brown, little worn down. Did you open it?" He said, "Whoa there, hold on. You're looking for a suitcase." I said, yes, my suitcase. I need it back. "Do you have it?" he said. "Calm down, will ya? I dropped it off at the police station yesterday night when I found it. You can stop by to pick it up if you want me to take you there. But it won't be a free trip," I said. His face goes white. For the first time since he got into my cab. He was silent for a few seconds. "The police have it. Are you sure?" he said. "Yeah. Took it there a few hours ago. You all right?" I said. "It's too late," he said. He had this horrible look in his eye, like he'd just watched someone die. "I need you to take me to the airport now, and if you're smart, you'll buy a ticket for yourself too," he continued. "What? Why? What the hell are you talking about?" I asked. He buries his head in his hands. "Never mind. It doesn't matter now," he said, and with that, he stepped out of my cab and sulked off down the street. Later that day, sirens blared throughout the city constantly. Roads were blocked, and people were getting emergency broadcasts to stay home. According to official reports, the police station I dropped the suitcase off at had a dangerous gas leak, and they were worried about a possible explosion. Whole BL was closed up. That was the official report anyway. But according to an inside source I have, it was a total lie. I really don't want to get my source in trouble because they're a good friend of mine. So I won't tell you anything about them. But just know that when I say they're trustworthy on this topic, I mean it. The problem wasn't a gas leak, but that suitcase I brought in. Some of the officers decided to open it up and look for some identifiable information on who it belonged to. When they opened it up, it was empty. Nothing in it but a few pens and blank sheets of paper. Only a few minutes after opening it, some officers started to get sick. One after another, they got dizzy and started vomiting. Immediately, alarm bells started ringing for all staff present, and it broke into real chaos. The suitcase was basically thrown into a holding cell, and ambulances were called for the sick officers. But it was too late. One by one, every sick officer who was close to the briefcase just started melting. It started with their skin, dust peeling off of their bodies and melting off onto the floor. The whole station was submerged in bloody screams and begs for help. Some of the onlookers wanted to help, but anyone who did would succumb to the same fate as the diseased. Some officers started to kill themselves at the first symptom, anything to avoid the excruciating feeling of helplessly watching your own skin melt away. Any police officer who didn't punch their own ticket would eventually melt into a puddle entirely. My source said he was one of 6 people that wasn't killed, "What happened to the briefcase?" I asked. The CDC swooped in, got me out and 5 others who didn't melt. They took the briefcase, but I'm not sure where, he said. "Fuck, man. What the hell was in that briefcase?" I asked. He takes another sip of his whiskey. "We were over at my place late that night. My daughter was in bed. We were playing some card games and drinking away the stress. Some genetically modified shit. I don't know. I'm not a scientist, but it was bad. Real bad. If a regular virus is a Roomba, this thing was the fucking Terminator, man," he answered. At the end of the day, the CDC managed to spin the story into a gas leak, and nobody even knows that anyone died that day. I don't know how they did it, but here we are. From what he told me, they still have that briefcase. So I'm willing to bet they still have some of that virus kept as a sample. I just hope they don't do anything terrible with it. I felt pretty horrible about the whole situation. I mean, I basically delivered a bioweapon to the police station and killed a bunch of people. But I guess it could have been way worse. The guy who owned the briefcase said he wanted to go to the university, and I took him there. I doubt he was there for a lecture. I bet you he was planning on killing off the whole school. If he hadn't forgot the case, or if I brought it back to him, who knows how many people could have died. So, if you live in a big city and go to a university there, it's possible I may have accidentally saved your life. You're welcome. I'm not the smartest guy in the world. Everyone makes mistakes sometimes, and I'm no different. I'd like to think that when the time comes to make a critical decision, I'd always make the right choice. But sometimes you look back and kick yourself over not thinking long enough. Not every ultimatum can be solved with common sense. Sometimes you just make the wrong choice. I struggled a bit with whether or not I want to tell you guys this last story, because I don't want you to think of me as a bad guy. I do good things all the time. But at the end of the day, I'm a father first and a cabbie second. This story is about my late wife Angie, to my daughter. If you're still reading, I think it's time I told you what happened to your mother. She was beautiful when we first met. Long blonde hair and beautiful blue eyes. Her name was Angie, but to me, she was an angel. We did everything together, to peas in a pod style. It was no wonder only 6 months after we met, I was down on one knee. I wasn't really well off at the time. Fresh out of college with a useless degree and thousands in debt. Her father was a rich businessman. We got along really well even with our financial differences. He actually bought the ring for me give her about 18 months after that. A baby girl was born. Now, I was a little bit scared at first about being a father. You never really feel ready to bring new life into this world. But I swear, looking into that little girl's eyes for the first time changed everything. I would set the world on fire for her. However, as I grew exceptionally maternal, my wife started acting like a complete stranger. She was irritable and distant. The longer we stayed together, the more different she became. We fought every night, yelling and screaming about nothing. It was miserable. No matter how hard I tried, I just couldn't figure out what was wrong with her. She just changed into this monster who was so angry at everything. She started doing drugs. I'm not much of a drug guy, so I don't really know what kinds. But she always had bottles and needles in her bag. I was just so over the constant arguing I didn't even care. I mean, hey, you can't yell at me if you're stoned and lethargic. So I let it go on way longer than it should have. 2 years this went on, and I just let it happen. The final straw for me is when I watched this monster wearing my wife's skin slap our daughter across the face for crying too loud. I lost it. Just completely lost it. No one will ever lay a hand on my daughter and get away with it, no matter who you are. I kicked her out of the house and threw all of her stuff into the sidewalk. I locked the windows and put new locks on the doors. Never again. The divorce was messy. But after drug substances were found in her purse, I was given custody of our kid. She didn't even seem upset. It was soon after that I started my job as a cab driver. Her family had the money, and after I kicked her out, she took the money with her. The next 4 months pass and I don't hear word from her. No calls or texts, and nothing. Then one day this couple waved me down from the side of the street. So I picked them up. "Hey, how are ya?" I said. "I'm doing fantastic now." "Thank you," said the woman. She had matted blonde hair with ratty clothes, really skinny and sick-looking. The guy stepped into the car next and was kinda the same way. Short spotty hair and track marks on his arm. "How have you been?" "It's been a while," says the girl. I turned around to face them and I could hardly believe what I was seeing. It was Angie, along with what must be her coked-out new boyfriend. "Angie, is that you?" I said. "Sure is. You miss me yet?" She said. "Hey, who the fuck are you?" said that guy in the back. "That's my ex. Don't worry though, he's a loser." "Ha ha ha," said Angie. I was speechless. She looked like she just crawled out of a cracked den. Dried skin, bone skinny, black teeth. It was horrible to see such a beautiful young girl turn into this creature that was in my back seat. "Yo, we gonna have a problem here," said the guy. "No way this little bitch spends all his time with that little past. I don't even think about him anymore," said Angie. "Don't you dare fucking talk about our daughter that way, Angel." I said. It was a bit of a slip of the tongue. I called her Angel while we were together, and I guess it slipped out. Regardless, it made the guy in the back irrationally angry. "Yo, hold up, Angel. The fuck? You have a kid with this fucking bitch," he said. He grabbed a fistful of Angie's hair and opened the car door on his side. "You fucking slut," he said, as he pulled her across my back seat and out the door by her hair. She started screaming and kicking, saying I was a liar and she would never have a kid with someone like me. He wasn't listening to a word she said. He just pulled her onto the street and stood over her, screaming about how much of a slut she was. I stayed in my cab and just watched from my mirror. I was just as depressed watching this happen, and even more depressed by what she said. I just sat there holding back tears. In that moment, I thought about my daughter, how I couldn't let myself get wrapped up into this shit because she needed me. My ex did this to herself, and I wasn't going to end up in that rotten world she lived in. So I left, put my cab in drive, and just left her there in the street pleading for help. I looked one last time out of my rearview mirror at them before I got too far away. The last time I ever saw her was when she was getting kicked on the ground in the middle of the street. I drove straight home and parked in my driveway before I broke down in tears. I felt horrible for leaving her like that, but all I wanted to do in that moment was to just get away from that whole mess. I walked into my home, paid the babysitter, and locked the door. I went up to my daughter's room and sat on the floor next to her bed. She was only 2 years old, but I could tell she was going to be the sweetest young lady you'd ever meet. I slept on the floor in her room that night. It felt safer for me to be there between her and the door. 2 weeks later, the police picked up my ex-wife for breaking into a pharmacy. Given her condition, they pretty much shipped her straight to the hospital for evaluation. At the time, I was still listed as her emergency call intact, so when she was admitted, I was called. I didn't want to, but I ended up driving all the way up to the hospital she was sent to. I guess I was looking for a bit of closure, and this was my last chance to get it. Her doctor brought me to her room. He had this weird look on his face, like he was trying to say something but didn't know how. Either way, I entered her room and saw her. For the first time since that night, she got into my cab. "Hey Angie, you doing all right?" I said, "I'll be fine as soon as I let them out," she said. "Let what out? What do you mean?" I said, "My spores. I just need to set them free to grow and spread," she said. Then she stuck out her finger and pushed it into her temple. Her skull just gives way to her finger, and she pushes deep into her own head, knuckle deep. I stumbled backwards in horrified shock at what I was seeing. She pulls out her finger in one quick motion, making a sickening gargling noise. Then greenish-brown ooze pours out of her punctured temple like a faucet. The nurses panic and run into the room with towels and gauze. They press down on the side of my wife's wound to try and stop the leakage, but instead they only warp her soft skull even worse than before. Ray, all of the nurses and myself watch in horror as the whole top of my wife's head sagged to the side before slopping off onto the floor in a pile of ooze and rot. The autopsy of her body revealed her entire head was just rotting away from the inside. The coroners believe that she was infected by a completely new microscopic fungal parasite that slowly ate and replaced her brain for years of her life. This meant that on that day I saw her in the back of my cab, her brain was already mush. When I heard this, a wave of flashbacks hit me all at once. All the time she screamed at me, all those drugs she took, all those poor choices she made. What if all of that was a symptom of her brain rotting away? Could I have saved her if I just paid more attention? I felt sick to my stomach. If I wasn't so blinded by my hatred for my ex-wife, I could have brought back the woman I once loved. She was sick the whole time, and I left her there on the street. Having her teeth kicked in. I'll regret that moment for the rest of my life. I should have at least called the police or said something, but I didn't. She died, and I can't think of a single thing I did to try and help her. In the end, I didn't even get to say goodbye. From then on, I think back on my ex-wife fondly. I choose to focus on the parts of her in my memory that were beautiful. Like making burned pancakes for breakfast or watching cheesy horror movies together. I can still see that look in her eyes she had when we found out she was pregnant. All of the good things that she was is still here with me Even through the hell that she went through, it's not much, but I hope it's enough. I'm sorry, Angel.